Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a Senior Engagement Specialist with Atkins Realis. Today, we are continuing our series of live stream and radio topics on the Northern Road Link project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way. The purpose of these discussions is to discuss various topics relevant to the Northern Road Link environmental and impact assessment. So let's get started. I am flying solo today, so you get to listen to my voice for the next 20 to 30 minutes. And in today's live stream, we're going to talk about road corridor alternatives and preferred corridor evaluation. So we're going to talk about these from a very general perspective, talking about the road corridors themselves, what they are, and then how we compare these different alternative road corridors, that actual process. So we'll walk you through that, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding about how this part of the environmental assessment or impact assessment works. So let's get started. And as we normally do, let's do a little bit if we could bring up the PowerPoint, let's do a little bit of a background on the project. And so this is the Northern Road Link is a proposed all-season road in Northern Ontario that sits on Treaty 9 land. It would connect the Ring of Fire mineral deposits to the all-season highway network via the proposed Martin Falls Community Access Road. It will provide an opportunity for Webequie First Nation to connect to the all-season highway network. Just to brief everyone, the Ring of Fire is considered to be one of the most promising mineral development opportunities in Ontario. There's a number of minerals that have proven to be present in the area, including chromite, cobalt, nickel, copper, and platinum. This project is subject to both the Provincial Environmental Assessment Act and the Federal Impact Assessment Act. There are two proponents to the project, and both are remote Indigenous communities, Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation. Both of these communities are located about 500 kilometers north of Thunder Bay in slightly different directions. And again, these are remote communities, not currently accessible by all season roads. So the only time these can be accessed by vehicle is in the winter for a very narrow and narrowing point, a length of time. You typically open for maybe 1 month or so in the winter. And again, all dependent on weather and and road conditions. So there have been a number of studies done previously on looking at an all-season road going to the Ring of Fire. In 2020, the province of Ontario and Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation announced an agreement to work together where the provinces would agree to submit themselves to the environmental assessment process, and so they have done that, and we are now well into the environmental assessment process right now. A lot of the field work has been undertaken, but there's still quite a bit left to go as well too. So that's where we stand when it comes to that project. Now, this project sits in a greater context of other proposed all-season roads. It actually sits in the middle between the Webequie Supply Road, proposed Webequie Supply Road, and the proposed Martin Falls Community Access Road. So The Webequie Supply Road is planned to run from the airport in Webequie southeast to the Big Falls Lake area on the east side of the Mukattai River, where it would then connect with the northern end of our proposed Northern Road Link Road. And then that Northern Road Link Road would extend south and connect up with the Martin Falls Community Access Road west of Martin Falls. And then that road would then continue south to connect with two resource roads that would be upgraded. And then ultimately those would then connect with the provincial highway network. So all three projects together would end up connecting, as I mentioned before, Webequie and Martin Falls First Nations to the provincial highway network, and then maybe in the future other First Nations could connect to the same road corridor to allow themselves to be connected to the highway network as well and no longer be remote. And in terms of this project together with the Martin Falls Community Access Road and the Martin Falls and the Webequie Supply Road would stimulate economic activity by allowing for the transport of goods and materials to and from the Ring of Fire, and people as well too. So that's where the project sits in the context of other projects in the area. And in terms of project components, the road itself is planned to be an all-season again, multi-use gravel road, although perhaps the final surface might change. We don't know entirely yet. We also don't know the length of the road yet. We know it would range anywhere from 117 kilometers to 164 kilometers in length. The right-of-way would be 100 meters, and then the actual cleared area would be 60 meters. Uh, in terms of crossings, there would be, of course, as you can imagine, lots of water crossings, and these we would use both culverts and bridges as structures to cross these water bodies. There is one very large bridge crossing or water crossing at the Attawapiskat River, and that crossing width is over 200 meters, 200 to 250 meters. And then, of course, with a project like this, it's more than just the road itself. There's other infrastructure required, both temporarily and permanently, including things like storage and laydown areas for equipment. These are typically associated with construction camps where the workers would be housed. There would be maintenance facilities or yards. These are typically permanent facilities in place to support the operation and maintenance of the road. There would be access roads, and what I mean by access roads is roads to access facilities such as aggregate sites, pits and quarries, where the material to both build the road and maintain the road would be sourced from. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the construction camps. The construction camps are for housing the workers. These would be located usually at relatively equal intervals along the corridor, the route of the road. So let's talk a little bit now about alternative corridors. So when we say corridor, we don't mean the exact place where the road will be. When we use the term corridor, we're referring to a 2-kilometer wide sort of swath, I guess, or piece of land. And then the idea is we identify corridors, go through a process, of which is what we're talking about today, to identify a preferred corridor. But the actual position of the road will sit somewhere within that corridor, somewhere in that sort of 2-kilometer wide band. And right now we have a number of options for road corridors for different segments. So we're going through that process now of evaluating these different segments. And then the idea is ultimately to make sure to choose between the segments so that the entire, you end up with a continuous corridor for the project of road segments extending from the south end, which is where it meets the Martin Falls Community Access Road, all the way up to the Ring of Fire area. And we go through this environmental assessment or impact assessment process to identify other alternatives that might be worth considering, and also to get input on those alternatives. So let's move now and talk a little bit about the terms used in the alternatives assessment process. And this is important to understand these terms. And you may be familiar with some of these terms. We've used these before in previous presentations, but there's a couple of new ones here. So the first term is factors. And when we talk about factors, what that is a grouping of criteria or things that are used and studied um, in in terms of as part of the environmental assessment. So it's almost like a grouping. So the best way to do this, to explain this, is by using an example. So one factor would be natural environment. Now we all know that natural environment consists of many different things. So let's look at an example, one being caribou. So caribou would be one of the number of criteria that would sit within the factor of natural environment. And the other term for criteria or things that are studied is valued components. You'll see that one as well too. So it's almost like criteria or valued components are subsets or subgroups within a specific factor. So caribou within natural environment. Then we have another term called indicators. Um, Indicators are ways of so they sit within the criteria, and indicators are ways of measuring or representing uh, things for the environmental assessment. So, for example, if you're looking at the factor of natural environment and at the valued component or criterion of caribou, an indicator or a way of measuring impacts would be area of nursery habitat disturbed or lost. So so indicators are ways of measuring things, and that's how we get the data, and that's how we get the data that we use, and you'll see this a little bit later on, to do the evaluation of the different corridors. Then we have another term called data sets, and when we talk about data sets, we're talking about layers of information. Um, these are computerized layers, digital layers of information that are used. So we're talking about GIS data sets in most cases here. GIS is Geographic Information Systems. And so, for example, when we look at natural environment, the factor of natural environment, and we look at the criterion of caribou and the indicator of area of nursery habitat, the data set, the GIS layer, would be the actual area of nursery habitat. So showing those areas on a map, digitally, where nursery habitat is for caribou. The other term that we have is called weightings, and the weightings are the how that works is that's how we prioritize or assign importance to one factor over another in the simulation model, because we go through this when we evaluate the different corridors. We put them in what we call a simulation model, where we take all the layers of information, all the factors and all the criteria and all the indicators, and typically as GIS data sets, we put them together. But when we put them together, we assign weightings or importance to each one of them. And then scoring is how we represent each indicator. So an indicator sits within the valued component. Remember, it's a way of measuring. The scoring is how we represent each indicator of the model. And I'll explain this in a minute. So when we talk about the alternatives assessment and the approach, what we're talking about is comparing the advantages and disadvantages of different segment options. And so what we do is we use a computer software tool that I've been talking about that is designed to look at all this different information, all these different factors to compare the different segment options, road corridor options, using all these different factors. So it can get quite complicated. But with the use of computers, it can take something that's really complicated and do it very quickly. And you can look at different situations. You can weigh factors differently. So the data that we use in this software simulation tool, it represents the indicators. So it's measures of the valued components or the criteria. And so we put those data in there and then run the software, and then we can rerun it too, and I'll show you that in a minute. But the whole point of it is to look at different situations and be able to take all this information, complicated information, and look at all different kinds of scenarios or situations, so that you're factoring things in a really comprehensive way and making decisions based on the best available and the most information possible. And then, of course, this isn't just done in a bubble or in a vacuum. It's all done in the context of consultation. So we meet with community members, we meet with the general public to talk about this through open houses and community meetings. So moving on to the next slide, factors and criteria. This will probably help people understand things a little bit better in terms of when I talk about factors. So some of the different factors could include, and do include in the model, Indigenous land use and interests. So some of the criteria or things that we would study within that would be Indigenous land and resource use, sustenance on wildlife and waterfowl species. So that means um, dependency for food on wildlife and wildlife species. Then we look at natural environment, another factor. So the criteria could be caribou, they could be wolverine, they could be bats, fish and fish habitat, wetlands, and riparian ecosystems. So when we talk, what does riparian mean? It means close to the water. Riparian means anything within a short distance of a stream or a lake. And another factor could be socioeconomic environment. Remember, environmental assessments or impact assessments don't just look at nature or the physical or biological environment, they also look at the socioeconomic environment. So some of the criteria looked at here could include archaeology, recreational activities, parks, mineral and aggregate resources as well. Another factor, physical environment. So some of the criteria looked at for physical environment could be surface water, groundwater, air, noise, greenhouse gases. And then, of course, there's the more on the engineering side of things, the technical considerations. So looking at constructability, how easy would the road be to build? How easy or difficult would the road be to build based on where it's located? Design, the cost, and supportive infrastructure, location and nature of the supportive infrastructure. So a lot of different factors are included in this model. This model, again, allows us to operate to mash through a lot of information in a short period of time, and really helps decision making and allows for the most informed kind of decision making. So if we move on to the next slide, we're talking about multi-factor analysis, weighting and scoring. So this is just an example here. If you could, we can bring that up on the screen. So we have across the top, we have the different symbols representing the different factors. So indigenous land use and interests, natural environment, socioeconomic environment, physical environment, technical considerations. And then for each, we have a weighting. So in this case, we've applied an equal weighting, 20% weight to each one of the factors. And then after that, we have scoring. So we have a couple of things. We have the criteria or the indicators associated with the criteria. So number of trap lines, for example, under indigenous land use and interests, number of birthing sites, number of portage routes, portage routes. So, and then you would assign a score for each one of these. So you can see how complicated this could get very quickly. And if we move to the next slide, we'll talk about, we'll just give an example. So we'll take a factor of biological environment. So we have, let's say we have two criteria or valued components. One is moose and one is fish habitat. For the moose, the indicators could be area of winter habitat, area of aquatic feeding habitat. There's others as well too. There's nursery habitat, other life stage type habitat areas. And then for fish and fish habitat, indicators could be areas of water bodies impacted. For example, if a bridge were built or a culvert were built across a watercourse to allow the road to cross, what area would be impacted temporarily and permanently from the road being there. And then areas of high sensitivity habitat. So is it a spawning area? Is it a nursery or rearing area as well? And then if we look at another factor, indigenous land use and interests, valued components or criteria could be indigenous current and historical use of lands for traditional purposes. And then indicators could be something like area of caribou habitat impacted, and then you have different classes of caribou impact, number of hunting and fishing cabins or camps impacted, and then area of plant harvesting or gathering sites impacted in the case where there are known areas where community members harvest plants for different reasons, whether it's food or medicine. Moving to our next slide, this just basically lays out the different methods for analysis, starting with gathering the input data, which takes a lot of time in the field, collecting the field work and doing other research as well too from the desktop, assigning, scoring, and weighting, building the model, and then running the model. And then you review the output, preliminary results, refine the model. It's a back and forth. It's what you call an iterative process. So you go back and forth, running the model, rerunning the model, and then you evaluate outside of the model, including consultation. So I talked about this earlier. The model isn't the only sole decision-making method for evaluating the corridors. It's a tool. It's a tool that allows us to look at a lot of different information very quickly, and then we can take that information to the public and indigenous communities and get feedback from them. And then ultimately at the end of that process, select a preferred corridor, which would then go forward further in the process as the general location where the road would sit, somewhere within that 2-kilometer wide corridor. So we've reached almost at the end of our live stream here today. So I just wanted to do a quick summary for everyone. Just to remind everyone that each corridor segment is 2 kilometers wide. It's not an exact location of the road. And the reason for that is to allow us room to move and shift the road based on new information that comes in. Alternative corridor segments are compared using multiple criteria that we talked about earlier. So you have the factors, you have the criteria and valued components, and then you have the indicators that are used as the measuring methods within each one of those. Each criterion, so a criterion is one item. Criteria is more than one item. For example, natural environment has measures called indicators, and these indicators serve as data for the model, which is the model is run using the computer software, and that evaluates the corridor segments. And again, and I want to stress this as much as possible. Consultation and engagement is used to inform this entire process. It's not just done by the computer alone. The computer helps us crunch a lot of data very quickly so that we can get out and get feedback from the public and Indigenous communities. So that is all for today. We hope you found this useful. Um, we're back again next week, and next week we're going to talk about the SWOT analysis for identification of a preferred corridor. And if you don't know what a SWOT analysis is, then you should tune in next week and I will tell you what a SWOT analysis is. Don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available on our website, northernroadlink.ca. Miigwech, and make sure to look out for project updates on social media and our website.